Namaskar and welcome to this exciting show with a very vibrant personality. He is known to inspire people in every possible way. You can call him a godfather or messiah of all sections of society where he lives. He has contributed a lot to his own culture, traditions in the city where he lives. He is a doctor by profession, plus he is a philanthropist, and he is a historian, and he is a philosopher. A lot more can be said about this gentleman, but before we find out more from him, today's topic is Yoga Anushilanam, which is meant how yoga inspires discipline in our own lives. So without delay, I would like to bring on to Dr. J. Jitendra Jambal.
Namaskar.
And
I'll
so,
start. I'll start this session with a prayer to the Guru, and I'm sure that this particular verse from Guru Gita will inspire all your listeners for the rest of their lives because the words are beautiful. When I pray to my Guru, I say, Adnyana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. I pray to my Guru, I pray to my teacher, I pray to my mentor, one who has opened my eyes by using something called Anjan. Anjan is very popularly used in India, particularly for small children, uh, to make their eyesight sharp. And they use a thin glass rod to put that anjan in the eyes, to open the eyes to the world, to all the knowledge, the plethora of knowledge and wisdom that is all around us. And that job is done by your teacher, your mentor, your guru. So I pray to my guru to give me strength to put his views across to you. Thank you. Let's start.
beautiful, beautiful prayer. And before we start any Bhagavatam class, we give the same thing. Om Ajnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya. Beautiful prayer. And last time also, you had quoted the first shloka of Srimad Bhagavatam. And and also you had quoted that. So it just showed your heart is in the right place. And also scripturally also. So today also you quoted a very powerful prayer, and I think
Yeah,
you know.
it's the first verse of Patanjali Yog Pradeep, and it goes Atha Yoganushasanam. Uh, Patanjali Yoga Sutra. There is a way in which the ancient Indian wisdom it is compressed. It is compressed in the form of what is known as a sutra. So whenever you talk about any sutra, whether it is Brahma Sutra or Shiva Sutra or Narad Bhakti Sutra or Patanjali Yoga Sutra, uh, in very small, very limited number of words, wealth of knowledge is compressed. It's like something being zipped into a small area to accommodate a large file. So the first verse is Atha Yoganushasanam. It is relevant because yoga has now crossed all boundaries of all the countries. Now, since Narendra Bhai Modi became the Prime Minister and he pushed for an international event on the name of yoga, and 21st of June was declared the International Yoga Day by more than 180 countries synonymously, they agreed to it. It is being celebrated now everywhere. Almost 200 countries all over the world are celebrating the Yoga Day on 21st of June, which we know last Sunday was 21st of June. And so I thought that let us talk about yoga. Because when we say yoga, It gives all kinds of different signals to different people. And what yoga actually is, or what yoga actually means, is not clear to many people. So, what I think is, we'll first just talk about what is yoga. Now, yoga comes from the dhatu yuj, because you are also very aware of Sanskrit and how the words come in existence. I'm sure you know that yuj stands for uniting. When you are uniting two things, that action is denoted by the dhatu yuj. And when you talk about yoga, you're talking about uniting something with something else. Now, what is that something which you are uniting with something else? The Indian perspective, or the ancient Sanatan Vedic perspective, is that what we are trying to unite is the Atma, and with whom we are trying to unite is the Paramatma, the soul with the Almighty. And the union of the two is known as yoga. So the word yoga is very clear. There should be no confusion about it. And when we take it from here, we are looking at different types of yoga. And when we talk of yoga, we automatically think about, guess who? Krishna. Because when we talk about Gita, when we talk about Krishna, what he has said about different types of yoga in Bhagavad Gita, because each chapter is dedicated to a certain type of yoga. And this yoga can be Karma Yoga, it can be Bhakti Yoga, it can be Jnana Yoga, it can be Sankhya Yoga, it can be Karma Sannyasa Yoga, it can be Vibhuti Yoga. So I hope I'm not confusing everybody there. I'm sure people understand what I'm talking about, because I feel that people who are joining with us and who have joined with your group are quite aware of Krishna and the basic philosophy of Krishna. So when you look at yoga and the different aspects and the expanse of yoga, then you are actually looking at several galaxies. We are looking at a universe. And this yoga, when it comes down to the International Yoga Day, is a micro yoga. So we are talking only about one very small little part of yoga. And that yoga, which we are going to talk about, is Kriya Yoga. So we'll restrict it, because otherwise this talk will last forever. So we'll just stick to Kriya Yoga.
No, you have put it across very well. And yoga is a very popular topic in US. It's a $25 billion industry in the US, and it's growing at such a rapid pace within the US that it's very difficult to stop its growth in the US. So approximately 45 million Americans have tested the benefits of yoga, and approximately 13 million Americans do it daily, and it is growing in every single sphere, because yoga is independent of any religious beliefs. When somebody tells me about how do you explain Bhagavad Gita and how to differentiate between Bhagavad Gita and other Abrahamic literature, I have a very one line answer. I say Abrahamic literatures tell you what to do, and Bhagavad Gita lets you discover yourself.
Exactly,
That's,
exactly,
that's
exactly.
the
It's the hands-on experience which is important.
exactly. So when you are experiencing yoga, nobody can has to preach to you because you already feel it. Now, yesterday we had a yoga scientist, Atul Vyasji, on this thing, and he gave us and he's a trainer to Kate Winslet and other Hollywood stars, and he put it in one line the benefits of pranayam, and I believe it is hugely popular. Now, today I'm going to ask you to tell us about Kriya Yoga.
Right. Uh, first, let me just slightly elaborate on the first sutra of Patanjali, which is Atha Yoga Anushasanam. When we say Atha, what we mean is now.
Now.
So now we are going to look at the Anushasan of yoga, the discipline of yoga, the teaching of yoga, the training of yoga, and how you can learn and practice yoga in your life. So this is the first line, and this line compresses everything into one small word that it demands your 100% attention. It requires all of you. It's not a pastime. You can't perform any yogic activity while you are doing so many other things. You can't be multitasking. So we are looking at a event, we are looking at a discipline which requires your 100% attention. Let's go very quickly into the history of yoga and what is known to the scientific world. I came across a very beautiful book uh, uh, known as Yoga Risks and Science of Yoga Risks and Rewards. A very well written book. And that book has actually given the history of modern yoga very clearly. But just for everybody, when we talk about yoga, we talk about Patanjali because Patanjali was the first sage who actually elaborated on yoga, and particularly he talked about a lot of other things. I mean, he talked about Sankhya Yoga, he talked about grammar, the Panini Vyakaran, he talked about so many other things. But the most popular of his writings was on yoga, and that was on Kriya Yoga, or some people would probably call it Hatha Yoga. Now, I'll also talk about the meaning of Hatha, but Patanjali was, as per the scientists, he was somewhere between 200 BC to around 400 AD. And because, as you know, the Sanatan Vedic Dharma is never very particular about these time frames and things. It's more particular about the philosophy, more particular about what is being said, rather than when it was said and how it was said and so on and so forth. So, Patanjali was during that period. Now, followed by Patanjali, we come across Gorakhnath. And everybody, I think a large number of people will know of the Nath sect, the Naths, the Machindar, Gorakh, Jalandhar, Charpat, so on and so forth. Gorakshanath was one who elaborated on yoga in his treatise, which is known as Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which was somewhere around 1200 AD. But the popular yoga or the popular Kriya Yoga was by Gheranda. And Gheranda was a 17th century sage, probably somewhere near Bengal or Odisha. And he actually came up with what is known as Saptanga Yoga. So, the yoga of Patanjali was Ashtanga. It had 8 steps. The yoga of Gheranda was Saptanga. The yoga of Gorakshanath was Shadang. And the yoga of Swatmaram was Chaturanga. So the yoga was divided into 8, 7, 6, or 4 steps, and there were steps to be followed by different people. You see, due to the change in the philosophy, the change in the atmosphere, what we call Desh Kal Paristhiti, and the changing times, the demands changed, and the philosophers put their views across on the same subject in a different manner, which happens always. Even if today you see something about corona 3 months ago and today, It's completely different. The concept of corona, how the virus spreads and what sort of disease it creates, how it creates, so on and so forth. So these yogis have actually uh, defined the same principle in different manners over a period of time. So Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali is very clear. The 8 steps are, as we know, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. Now, this is going to be slightly complicated for the uninitiated to understand, because people who have been practicing yoga, and as you say, millions of people are practicing yoga today in America and all over the world, they would know a lot about what is being said when I say yama, niyama, asana, pranayama. So, yama and niyam, they are simply the morals and ethical values in the world. Satya, ahimsa, brahmacharya, asteya, aparigraha. Now, these 5 are yamas. We don't need to talk about Satya. Everybody knows what Satya is. We don't need to talk about Ahimsa. Ahimsa is very clearly non-violence. And when we say non-violence, it encompasses all kinds of violence. Physical, mental, social, every kind of violence. We talk about Satya, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, and Asteya. When we say Brahmacharya, people automatically start relating it to sex. That is completely wrong. When we say somebody is a brahmachari, it means that his behavior, the way he carries himself, the way she carries herself in the society is appropriate of a Brahmin. And what is a Brahmin? Brahmin is a person who knows what is Brahma, or who is looking for Brahma, a mumukshu. So we have Satya, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, Asteya, and Aparigraha. Asteya means not to steal. Obviously, in today's world, that's a very difficult thing, because we have so much competition. We are trying, we are clawing our way up this ladder of success. We are pushing people behind. We are actually struggling with people. And here somebody is saying, Asteya, don't take anything which belongs to somebody else. And aparigraha. Aparigraha is also a very good, very beautiful word. When we say aparigraha, what we mean is that reduce the demands of your own self. If you can do with 4 sets of clothes, don't buy 40. If you can do with 3 pairs of shoes, don't get 60 pairs of shoes. Keep only as much as is required for yourself. So these 5 are the yamas. And then come the niyamas. Santosh, Shauch, Tap, Swadhyay, and Ishwar Pranidham. Now these 5 should be followed as rigorously as the yamas. And what are they? Number 1, Santosh. And how do you define Santosh? Self-satisfaction. If you are satisfied with, let's say, 1 car, why do you need 5 cars? And Santosh is something which is inbuilt. It comes from within. If you are happy within yourself, if you are satisfied with what you have, then all your burning problems in your heart end. So, Santosh. What is Shauch? Shauch is Shuchita. Shuchita means cleanliness. You clean your body. You clean your mind. Both inner and outer cleanliness. When you talk about outer cleanliness, we are talking about different kinds of procedures to clean your body physically. And when you're talking about inner cleanliness, we are talking about mental cleaning. all that rubbish which is dumped here, all the rubbish which we have collected over years and years of social exposure, years and years of watching television, years and years of literature, which is completely clogging up the channels of your brain and which are actually not allowing you to learn what is important, but just loading up your brain with unnecessary baggage. Clean that up. So, Santosh, Shauch. Third comes Tapa. Now, who can perform a Tapa? What is a Tapa? Tapa is penance. In some ways, you try to make your body something which it doesn't want to do. Your body says you want to lie down and sleep, but now you want to sit down and meditate. Your body says that you want to just lounge, sit on a couch and watch television, but your mind tells, no, this is the time to go for a jog. Now that is the type of tapa. In the past, the rishis used to perform penance, standing on one leg, eating nothing, fasting for days together. All that has become now irrelevant. Kalabhaya. So it is irrelevant. What is relevant now is to train your mind, train your body to perform what your mind tells you. And if you can do that, you are happy and successful in your tapa. The next is Swadhyaya. Read something every day. Read something which will actually enlighten your life, which will illuminate your brain, which will give you knowledge and wisdom, both. Because knowledge can be acquired from the books, but wisdom will only come with experience. Now that is Swadhyaya. And it comes only when you read. And then comes last but not the least, Ishwar Pranidhan. And when I say Ishwar, I'm talking about the Almighty God. You can call him Ram, you can call him Krishna, some may call him Allah, others may call him God, Zarathustra, whatever, Ahur Mazda. But it is one power, and that one power needs concentrating upon. Ishwar Pranidhan is thinking about God, concentrating upon God, meditating upon God. So these 10 steps of Yama, Niyama, once a person goes through these, then the person enters into the third realm. And this third realm is asana. And when we talk about asana, most people think that is the beginning and end of yoga. But that's just the third step. Because after asanas, we have pranayam. After pranayam, we have pratyahara. After pratyahara, we have dharana, then dhyan and samadhi. So let's just quickly look at these 6 steps. What is an asana? The definition of asana is very simple. Sthiram, sukham, asanam. What is stable? What is comfortable for an individual? That is the asana that he should adopt. Now there are several asanas. In the ancient Indian literature, hundreds of asanas have been mentioned. But the most practical asana series that I find is in Gheranda Samhita. Gheranda Samhita gives clearly 35 asanas. And if you master, you're not supposed to, or you're not expected to master all of the asanas. Even one is enough. Because if you are able to master one asana, then you should be able to sit in that asana for many hours. What is known as kaya sthiryam, the stability of the body. Now you will see people, they'll sit like this, then after some time they'll change their posture, then they'll put one leg up, then they'll put the second leg up. Now all that will go away. You'll become stable, you'll become comfortable, and that asana is the one which is most suitable for you. Most of the people can sit comfortably in Sukhasana, some can sit in Padmasana, there are others who can sit in more complex asanas. But I think asan conceptually is a position which is stable and which is comfortable. Then comes pranayam. And pranayam is not just breathing in and out. What pranayam means is expanding the horizon of prana. And what is prana? Prana is the power of living. It's the unique power that every living being, every living organism has. The moment you expand the the thinking, you expand the entire universe within you. That is the elaboration of prana, and that is the ayam of prana. So, pranayam is breathing in and out, but by breathing in and out, your ultimate objective is to take your soul to a very high level of energy. And this level of energy, where do you use it? You don't use it to conquer others, you don't use it to subjugate others, you don't use it to entice others, attract others. You use it for your self elevation. Now that is pranayama. Then comes pratyahar. What is pratyahar? Pratyahar is the fifth limb of the eight-limbed Patanjali Yoga. Pratyahar means relaxation. You have to be able to relax your body completely. In this today's world, how many times in a week do you actually relax? Just ask yourself that question. Are you relaxed at any point of time in the day or night? Just ask this question. Over a week, are you relaxed for 1 hour, 2 hours? Even when you are asleep, people are not relaxed. Even in their sleep, they are tense. They are dreaming about their future, their work, their job, their love life. So they're tense all the time. And that is taken care of by pratyahara. Now, for pratyahara, there are very complex procedures, and we'll talk about it during the subsequent programs when we elaborate on how to perform pratyahara. Then comes dharana. Now, dharana is more or less opposite of pratyahara. If pratyahara is relaxation, drawing your sensory feelings within your own body, like a tortoise draws its limbs and its heads into its shell and becomes completely impervious to the uh, impact of the atmosphere or the impact of the surroundings. You've seen the tortoise, the way it sort of retracts all its bodies. Now that is pratyahara. But what is dharana? Dharana is focus. You focus your mind because I'm sure somebody must have talked about mana, chitta, buddhi, ahankara, etc. The different parts of mind. Have they? Or should I elaborate on that? No.
Yeah, you can elaborate that shortly, briefly.
Okay. Okay. When you are talking about a personality, the personality constitutes basically two parts. One is the body, and second is the subtler parts of the body, which you cannot see, which you cannot demonstrate, which you cannot show by dissection, but they exist. The body exists in the physical form, but the part of the your personality which moves the body is made up of mana, buddhi, chitta, and ahankar. And they are different very subtly. Mana is mind, buddhi is intellect, chitta is your past experiences, and ahankar is your perception of your own being, right? So mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankar, all these four, when you concentrate on a particular area of your inner self, that is known as dharana. And this dharana, for dharana, you have to focus your mind. And when you focus your mind, for example, you perform something called trataka. So what you have is a candle light, and then you are looking at it for several minutes without blinking your eyes. Focus your mind completely on it. Then close your eyes and visualize that the candle, little lamp in your mind. Now that is dharana. And the dharana that you see in here is called Chidakash dharana. The one in the chest cavity is known as Dahrakash dharana. So you have different kinds of dharana. We'll elaborate upon it in subsequent discussions. So then you advance from pratyahar to dharana, and then from dharana you advance to what is known as dhyan. And dhyan is commonly known in the public, in the society, as meditation. I very humbly I would beg to submit that let us not define dhyan as meditation. Meditation is just a part of dhyan. So if you look at dhyan, your entire personality, your entire being starts to move in a certain direction. Only in the direction where you want it to move. You control all your senses. You control your mind, which is like a monkey who is jumping around here and there, and you're trying to check it all the time. But when you check it and push it in a particular direction, and when you find that path and you start walking on that path, that is dhyan. So dhyan again is a process which takes you closer to your ultimate realization, to your ultimate self-realization, or what yogis say, samadhi. And what is samadhi? Samadhi is of two types, savikalp and nirvikalp. Now, savikalpa samadhi is a state of your being where you have completely forgotten yourself, but for one aspect. You can differentiate between yourself and your ultimate God. It may be Krishna, it may be Shiva, it may be Rama, it may be Radha, whoever. So you feel, you forget everything. You have forgotten the world. You cannot imagine anything else. And in that stage of samadhi, you can remain for hours and hours and hours. Many people have remained in samadhi for years. And there are several books available in India where large number of people have described their experience of samadhi. There is a very famous book called Towards the Silver Crests of Himalaya that talks about the experience of a average person who undergoes the experience of samadhi. And the ultimate stage is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And when you say Nirvikalpa Samadhi, what is Nirvikalpa Samadhi? When everything else ceases. When you realize that the world outside is nothing else but what is within you. You yourself are the one which every human being, every being in the world is looking for. You know, the concept of Aham Brahmasmi. I am the Brahma. I am the God. In this body, the God resides. In this mind, the universe resides. So the moment you come across that, and people who have been in Nirvikalp Samadhi, you know, there are several examples. Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramhans used to go into Savikalp Samadhi for hours and hours and hours at a stretch. Vivekananda went into Nirvikalp Samadhi only once in his life. And Ramakrishna Thakurji went to his room running, caught his hand and said, "Come down, you are not to leave this world in a Nirvikalp Samadhi. You are meant for something much bigger." I think with this, we will probably, I think it's too much, I think, to digest for anybody on one evening. So I'll leave it to you for the next session whenever you permit.
So you put it everything so passionately and such a in such a forceful message to many viewers who are watching live. And so my question to you is so there is a yoga ladder is also a concept being discussed in a big way.
Yep, yep.
And where is a yoga ladder? I call it yoga because I think yoga is a
Yeah,
misnomer.
yoga is a very westernized. Yeah, yeah.
So yoga in the yoga ladder, there is a concept of beginning. So in this time, where we're looking in the time, in the current time or society we're living in, the concept of meditation is catching up, and the
Yeah,
analysts say it's the next $1 trillion industry, and it's going to grow up further because American Medical Association, many American prominent physician associations, and also Asian American Physicians Guild, all these organizations of doctors are recommending meditation and yoga. And there are other, I call it dogmatic religious groups like the church and the mosque and all these religious organizations,
which are
which are
opposing
very
it.
different than dharma. They are actually, they have always worked against science, and I don't know why. They've always worked against science. They've always worked against human capabilities, and also against the humanity, and in a way that human qualities have not developed fully under those organizations. So there is a clash over there. One side the scientific community, yoga community, and more liberal and broad-minded individuals, and on the other side you have these dogmas which have been existent because they have to promote an organization. So when
That's
the
right.
organization struggles with the individual, then the individual is the one at the loss, not the organization.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
but in
No,
what you described.
I'll go one step further and say it's not only the individual, it is the entire society which is losing by certain people opposing a certain way of thought or life. There is no question of oppressing others. This is 21st century. Where are you living? You are not living in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries when you could conquer the world by wielding a sword. Yeah.
Obviously, in today's world, you need more guns and swords. But here we are looking at the making the human a free man, and essentially what you're teaching, in a way, is that how a human being can become free from all kinds of pressure, stress, and the bondage of material or mental imaginations.
That's
And that's
right.
what you are teaching us in this wonderful explanation of Kriya Yoga. And with that, we come to an end of this session. And I am thankful to all the audience who waited patiently and heard the entire talk. We will have Dr. Jamdar again with similar interesting topic. And this topic was chosen by him, and all of you heard it very well. So we'll come back again with more similar topics which can help all of us. Thank you, Dr. Jamdar.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya. Namaskar.